So an extra spare wheel on the back of your van. I'm going to show you how you can make a bracket to do that. Here's the bracket that I made. You need to be able to weld in order to do this. Other than that, things are pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through a few things. We were able to bolt onto the hinges, so I'll go through that and how we did that. We've also got a bolt onto the door, and it's important with this bolt onto the door that you locate it so that it's accessible on the inside of your door. You wouldn't want it to be tucked up in here where you can't get to it. So you need to think about where that bolt goes, and working out these angles so that everything fits nicely and sits nicely is a little bit tricky, but I'll go through all of that with you, and you will hopefully do a better job than I have. So we have three connection points. We have the connection to the top hinge, the bottom hinge, and we have a connection to the face of the door here. This, where you locate this, is fairly important because you want to be able to access it from the inside of the door there. So as you can see, there's a lot of paneling there. You don't want it tucked up in here somewhere where you can't get to the nut. So first, let's just talk about the bolt on to the hinge over here and the bolt on to the bottom hinge. If we have a look at these hinges, then you can see that there's a bit of a gap from the back of this piece into the head of that bolt that sits inside there. So what we can do is we can put another bolt in poking out this way, as long as the head of it is slimline enough not to interfere with the hinge, and then we can bolt onto that. So measuring that hole, I've measured that's about 16 millimeters. So I've bought a couple of short M16 bolts. When I put them in initially, I found that the head was a little bit too thick and it was interfering with the door closing. So I just took my grinder with a grinding wheel and I ground off part of the head. You can see there, obviously I've ground off the rust proofing and I need to give that a little bit of paint. But I've made it more slimline, and when I put it in now, which I'll do in a second, you'll see that it doesn't interfere with the door closing anymore. So I've got that bolt in now, and you can see there's a little bit of play in there, and the door is closed now, so that's fine. So now we'll talk about how to get these angles right so that everything sits in the right place, and we'll work through that. So now we're going to find the middle of this, which is a pattern for our wheel. So that's 73, 74 centimeters. So half of that is 37. So the radius in this of the circle is 37. So there. Just put my pen in here, in the little loop. from the edge, and just make a couple of arcs. And that gives me, as near as down, look, that the middle is going to be here. So I'm just going to make a little hole there. So here's a template of our tyre that I made earlier. And what we're doing here is we're just trying to ensure that we get the tyre in the right place. So we need to be able to open the right hand door of the van in order to get the left hand door open. So if the tyre is over this way, we're going to have a problem because we're not going to be able to get it open. Also, we don't want the tyre to obscure the lights or the number plates. Otherwise, the police will pull us over and we'll have trouble there. So what I've done, what I found is the best way to do this, in my view, is to put some clear plastic, tape it over the door of the van, and then draw onto it what you want to do and the position of it. So I've figured out the right spot for the wheel so that it's out of the way of the door, it's not obscuring the lights and the number plate too much, and I've marked that point on the plastic where the middle of that wheel is going to be. Now I know that measuring the wheel, I know that I'm going to need a square plate for it to bolt onto, which is about 20 centimeters square. So I've come to the middle here and I've measured 10 centimeters each way and up and down, and I found the center line of that. So this square is going to be our plate, and then what we're going to do is get some aluminium box section, and it's going to run along this way, and then we're going to bend it and it's going to come down like so, and the point of it's going to just marry up with the edge of that plate, and then it's going to go down there, and then it's going to kink across to our bolt-on point over there. So what we can do now is we can measure the angles that we're going to need to cut in the rectangular aluminium tubing. Now it's a good idea here to have a reasonable amount of length straight there before you bend to come down, and a reasonable amount of distance over here before you bend to come up. Now the reason for that is if you do make a minor mistake over here and you find that your wheel isn't sitting quite in the right spot, you can always shift it across a little bit and drill this hole in a slightly different place to what you've marked there and there. So it's always a good idea to make provision for things that might go wrong along the way. Otherwise you end up wasting a lot of materials. So I guess you can think about this angle a little bit like this. If I have a straight piece of material that runs through like I've drawn there, then on that outside edge I have 180 degrees of angle. It's straight. What I need this to be to come down to this line here where my thumb is that angle inside from there to here needs to be 108 degrees. So I've got to lose 180 minus 108, which is 72 degrees. So with the 72 degrees that I need to lose, I'm going to take half off this side and half off that side. So I start with a square line, which I've put on with my set square, and I've measured out half of 72 and half of 72. I've taken those marks all the way around because I want to cut them quite accurately, so that I don't want to have a gap in the middle that I have to fill in with weld material if I can help that. Of course, always better to cut a little bit inside the line and recut later rather than overcut it and spoil your piece of material. So there's the piece I've taken out. I'm just going to clean that up a bit and flip it over, and then we'll heat it and bend it, and we'll go and check it to see it's the right angle. Okay, so I've got the blowtorch going. I'm going to use some gloves because things are going to get hot, and you'll find that it heats more efficiently from the bottom. So if you apply most of the heat at the bottom, that should work a little better. How do I know when it's ready to bend? Well, I keep heating until I see this piece start to sag a little bit. Then I know that it's hot enough, and I just give it very gentle pressure to just guide it into the right place, and then hold it there with my gloved hand so it can just cool a little bit, and then it'll stay there. There we go. Just a tiny bit of encouragement. Keep the heat going. Keep heating it while you're bending it. Just be gentle. And there we go. Just hold that in place so it can just cool down a little bit. This is why we wear gloves. Okay, so we heated that, and we've bent it, and you can see we're fairly close there. There's not much of a gap, which is good because that will weld better. The less gap we have there, the better it will be when we weld it. This side is not quite as good, but I think we can manage that. Now let's just go and double check that, because this is just an example of the method. I'll go and double check that on the van. Okay, so if we hold this up against the markings that we've made, and we're just really looking at this outside edge because that's where we've taken our angles, we can see that's pretty much on the money up there. It's pretty much on the money down there, and we've got a nice closed gap there, so we can weld that. Did this angle first, and then I held it up and double checked where I wanted to make those angles, the top and the bottom, so it lined up with the hinges. And then I measured and did each of those angles using the same method. And then because this is slightly rounded, the hinge here, I actually also put in a little bit of an angle towards the door, which again I measured first and I cut carefully so that the bracket could fit flat on there, and it would also fit flat against the door down here. So here's the one that I made earlier. Now when I made this one, I didn't use the plastic sheeting. I kind of winged it a bit, and afterwards I thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to rather use the plastic sheeting and draw it up and get it in exactly the right spot? Because when I first made the original one, I ended up with my wheel overlapping this door, and I had a problem. Fortunately, I'd left enough space on here that I could just move this hole across, shifting the bracket back a little to rectify that. So here we've got our approximately 108 degree bend there. This is where the bracket's going to touch the face of the door. You can see I've welded my 200 by 200 millimeter plate on the back, and then what I've got is I've got my angle up here. This particular one, this goes like so. So that's my bottom piece to go on there, and my top piece goes on there. Then what I've also got, as I was just explaining, is I've got a little bit of a kink in it, as you can see there, so that this sits flush and that sits flush too. So what you can see here is I've drilled larger holes, or I've cut larger holes with a hole saw through the back, so I can access the heads of those bolts, and that bolt there. Those bolts hold the wheel on. There's the other side of them. In order to strengthen this whole situation even more, I've got two of those bolts going through the actual frame of the bracket, and the third one just goes through the plate. I've also got a hole here which attaches to the door of the van, so you can see there I've got a hole drilled in the door of the van, and that gives me 3 points of connection, one on the upper hinge, one on the lower hinge, and one through the door there. Again, I've drilled a slightly bigger hole through the back here, so I can access the head of that bolt, and this hides behind the wheel when the wheel is on. With respect to these bolts here, which attach to the upper and lower hinges, I've not drilled through there because I can access those nuts through the ends over here, and the less I weaken the material of the bracket, obviously, the better. Right, so another tricky little issue is that we need to be able to know exactly where these holes need to go on our bracket. Otherwise these bolts aren't going to line up and the wheel isn't going to go on nicely. So what we can do is take a piece of paper, put it on the back like so, and just mark it all up as it is. Mark each of these holes. Don't move the paper while you do this. This is going to allow us to take that piece of paper and transfer the location of those holes onto the bracket, so that we get these bolts in exactly the right place. Right, so having these bolts on, then what I've done is I've just cut a short section of steel pipe, which is the same correct size, about 16 mil internal. They're basically just going to act as spacers, and then on top of those I've got some washers that are the right size, so when I put my wheel on, the wheel can press against there. I can put my nuts on so they bolt on nicely, and that will hold the wheel in just the right spot. I like to use nylock nuts. So I've just got some rubber which comes with a sticky backing from my hardware store, and I've just stuck that on wherever the bracket connects with the van so that it doesn't get too scratched up. And with respect to these open ends that we're left with over here, again I've got a thicker piece of that rubber. It's got a sticky surface on there if you pull that off, and I've just cut them the right size. I've used a hacksaw to cut that, and I can just squeeze them in there just to neaten that up. There are plugs or grommets you can get to do that. I just couldn't find the right size for that opening, so I just made something myself. So you can see where I've formed these angles. I've welded all around. If you wanted to make that even stronger, you could have a triangular piece of flat plate and you could weld that into that corner like so. You could do the same up at the top if you wanted to. This is really quite strong here. We've got the angle that's been bent through here. That's welded both sides. Where it touches the van here, I've ground that weld back, and I've got little rubber pads in here and at the other places where it connects to the van. Then with this plate, which the wheel mounts to, I've then welded that as well everywhere it connects with this frame, also on the back side, so that is really quite rigid and strong. I feel this is more than strong enough, but as I say, you could put a piece of flat plate there if you wanted to. So there it is, our extra spare wheel on the back of our van.